Okay.
Hello and welcome to the War Report. Now, we have quite the episode. Sorry about the mishap last week. We didn't get really anything out, but we have quite the show. We're going over some Syria stuff because it's almost that time of year. It's almost False Flagsmas. And then we're going to talk about Israel. We're going to talk some European news. Ukraine elections, North Korea, Venezuela, standard fare. Throw some breaks in there, just mixed up in that little pot, and we'll have a little nice cream of clown world stew or whatever we're doing now. I don't know. I don't keep up with these things enough as I should. But let's just jump right into it. So. We're coming up on April, which means it's almost time for Assad to find those chemical weapon stockpiles that the U.S. missed last year in their strikes. And look, he's gonna gas his own people. Just gonna happen. Okay, don't question it. It's gonna happen in a very convenient spot where there's a bunch of fighting. It could have been anyone, but we're gonna be sure it's Assad. Now, I've speculated over the past few episodes that another false flag might not happen. Now, do I think so now? I'm not entirely sure. Now, hear me out here. The agreement between Russia and Turkey over Idlib that they made back in September, so about half a year ago, has been shaky lately. There's been fighting on the outskirts, and it doesn't look like it's really going to hold. Now, I will say, if strike number three does happen, we'll have to look at something. So, 2017, the first Syria strike, Donald Trump comes into office. We think, oh, we're getting out of those neocon wars. Oh, he's going to be great. A much more happier, brighter, optimistic time. I can't say it's held up so far, but um, Trump had a symbolic strike on Syria. He threw a bone to the neocons and said, "Look, I'll play your dumb little game, and if you let me do whatever." 2018 rolls around. April 2018 rolls around, and the strike was somewhat symbolic, but in my opinion, it was a move to intimidate Iranian forces in Syria. You look at how they struck, you look at where they struck. They struck all across the country. They used bunker busters in particular last year. Starting to think, oh, maybe they're trying to get something or someone. I'm starting to think it was targeted at certain Iranian assets, especially with the whole week of Israeli strikes leading up to the US, UK, France strike. Now, if there is a 2019 strike, if there's a strike in the next month or so, I'm going to go on a limb here and say it may be targeted at intimidating Turkey. U.S. Turkish relations, as we've covered over the past several months, have been growing worse, and Russian Turkish relations have been growing better. And the U.S. actually just last week issued a threat to Turkey over their purchase of S 400s.
Yeah. It's accelerating pretty fast. And of course, Turkey is backing Venezuela with Russia and China. Uh, doesn't sound like a NATO partner, does it?
Oh, absolutely not.
Um, I think I think you have a very good point. That they might choose a target to get Turkey back in line.
Yeah, especially if it's going to be
That
near
would be
Idlib, like
interesting.
right near the Turkish border.
Hmm. To see how Erdogan is going to react to that, because in a way, I think Turkey's closeness with Russia already anticipates a kind of uh, division, a kind of divide in NATO and with the U.S. because there's only so much bargaining that you can do. You know, I think America currently, right now, is very frustrated that the coup so far in Venezuela has not been successful, um, and I think it's shocking that that Turkey didn't decide to just stand this one out and has decided to support Russia and Venezuela. So, I mean, if you watch CSIC IS videos, they'll talk ad nauseum about Russia and about internet trolls and so on, but they rarely discuss this division. So I look at that as this is fundamentally serious because it's something that the NATO think tanks are just not willing to discuss.
Yeah, I mean, and we've gone over this like ad nauseum, like pretty much every episode. The fact that after the Soviet Union fell, NATO ceased any reason to exist and has been spending the past 30 years trying to justify its own existence. You see that at every summit. They talk about, oh, we're countering X, Y, and Z. We're countering a resurgent Russia. Oh, something about China, something about terrorism. They make up all these reasons they should exist while buying oil and gas from Russia, while taking investments from the Chinese, while letting in these supposed terrorists, and it's chaotic. Now, one thing I will say, there is one thing that may point to there not being a false flag, which is our good friend Benjamin Netanyahu, Bibi Netanyahu, the great prime minister of our greatest ally, the state of Israel. He's in a bit of hot water right now, believe it or not.
oh yeah, F you. Take the finger.
Oh, absolutely, absolutely. But as we discussed previously over the past couple weeks, Netanyahu is facing corruption charges, and it's not looking all sunshines and rainbows for him. It's not looking pretty. Now, I won't get into too much detail. It's pretty much just the standard fare corruptions for politicians, which they can pretty much nail any of them on it. Now, why they went after him in particular, we can speculate all day and all night, but I want to keep it short. But even if nothing comes of these charges, a lot of support has shifted from the Likud party and Netanyahu to the more centrist, center-right opposition, because they're more of the hard, nationalistic right. And interestingly enough, with some of their moves, you may question that, but yeah, support is moving more towards the centrist right, and I can't remember the exact name of the party or the leaders, but yeah, it's not looking like Netanyahu and Likud are going to be able to build a coalition moving into the April 2019 elections. Now, Israeli elections are actually scheduled for April 9th of this year. Ironically enough, that's the exact year anniversary when the Israeli strikes on Syria started. So it's
hey, maybe Israel will bomb Damascus on Easter or something.
Oh yeah.
Don't give up. I mean, they did it on Christmas.
Yeah, and they did it on Easter last year too. It's it's truly the only country in the Middle East that cares about Christians. Trust me. It's honestly
literally the most oppressed country in the Middle East.
Oh, absolutely. Those 40 to 180 nukes or whatever. No, they don't exist. Don't stop being an anti-Semite. But interesting. I will say this. On top of all this, that you saw the reports last week, people are going on and on about Twitter, is Israel is losing support on the international stage, especially from the U.S. public, which has been historically very Zionistic, whether it be for liberalism or Protestantism, whatever reason they try to use to justify it. Now, support amongst the American public for Israel, in their dispute specifically with Palestine, has dropped to 59% overall. 5 points down from last year. It dropped specifically 6 points amongst Democrats and 13% amongst Republicans.
Wow. And we shouldn't forget that it seems that there's a majority of American Jews who are against Israel right now.
Oh, yeah.
I mean, if we look at, the fact that during the 2016 election, 75%, just a little north of that, voted for Hillary. And in the midterms, about 80% of Jews voted Democrat. There's a divide now, basically, within worldwide Judaism as well. And they go through these splits just like every other culture does.
It's interesting because the diaspora, they feel like you'll actually hear Israeli ministers talk about how the diaspora, they're losing touch with their roots, and again they start to ironically enough view themselves as part of the host culture or the quote unquote world citizen types, whereas the more conservative Jews, the more religious Jews are they're either very pro-Israel or, as you've seen especially in recent years, especially in Europe, actually moving back to Israel.
Yeah, that's true. That is happening. Of course, ultra-Orthodox tend not to support Israel at all. Some Orthodox and Reformed Orthodox do, of course. So.
Yeah, the ultra-Orthodox, they believe it has to be theocratic, it has to be from God. It's again, we could get into what their beliefs are all day, but
yeah,
that's pretty much in brief what it is.
Yeah.
But I will say this: support amongst both sides. Losing support amongst both sides from Republicans and Democrats makes sense. the American right, at least the grassroots, not necessarily the politicians or the people in power, as evidenced by what I'm about to say, has grown less interventionist and more nationalistic. Therefore, they care a lot less about foreign conflicts. And the left, because of their diversity coalition, because of their new strategy, courting every oppressed group under the sun, they've become more pro-Palestinian because that's what appeals to these groups, these new groups that they're courting. Now, one important thing to note is this was specifically for the Israeli-Palestinian conflict and not the state of Israel as a whole. For example, you'll see this, especially like within the European Union, especially amongst like some of the more establishment Democrats. A lot of neoliberals will whine, moan, and complain about Israeli settlements in the West Bank or what they do in Gaza, but they will wholeheartedly support what Israel does in Syria. They'll wholeheartedly support them in their great battle against the Iranians throughout the entire Middle East. So it's interesting that way because they'll condemn Israel for their internal policy and what they do with the Palestinians, but they'll get completely behind Israeli foreign policy.
Yeah, it's very odd that way. I mean, you see this with, in a way, they want the kind of they want Israel to also be like America, you could say, like they have the same liberal policies for more war, and especially wars that are countermeasures to Putin. But at the same time, they want a more liberal society, the kind of which that is in the West and in America.
Yeah, like you'll see, like they oppose like the nation state law that's been pushed through, and how Israel is now explicitly like you listen to Wild Loud and say like explicitly a state protecting the interests of the Jewish people, whatever. You'll see a lot of them oppose that, but then they'll support like the liberal things, like the Pride parades in Tel Aviv. They're just so wonderful. That's they always love to trot that out, try to court the liberals. But yeah, I just thought it was interesting the fact that yeah, support for Israel is falling on all sides, and it's like I'm not surprised. It only took so long, but I just figured it was worth mentioning. Pretty interesting. Now we're gonna get into some European news. We're actually breezing through this pretty fast. It may be a bit of a shorter episode tonight, but we'll see how it plays out. So, Viktor Orban, of course, Prime Minister of Hungary, has been continuing his crusade against the European Union. Now, as we discussed a couple weeks back, the EPP, which is the ruling party of the European Commission, has threatened Orban's Fidesz party with expulsion if his attacks against Soros and Brussels do not cease. Now, the other day, Orban called their bluff, and he refused to back down on his comments. The EPP said they still may expel Orban as soon as March 20th, but pretty much what a lot of analysts have said, and a lot of what I frankly tend to agree with, is it would be more of a "you can't fire me, I quit" sort of scenario where Orban walks out on them, even though they technically kick him out.
Right, and it's also it only confirms this narrative that if opposing Soros is in some way not is only a conspiracy theory that Soros is an important hand in EU politics. Of course, he is in American politics as well. If that's the case, then why pay attention to Orban? Like, why not spin it that Orban is a crazy conspiracy theorist, right? But
Yeah,
why threaten him with expulsion if this is just a crazy conspiracy theory? It only buttresses the main argument that he's been making for several years right now. So I think he's playing them very well, and if they start to sound serious about it, like he's going to go to Moscow, like he's going to do it again. The rift is happening.
Oh, absolutely, and we'll get into that when we talk about some of the stuff with Italy. But yeah, it's interesting because Orban, pretty much when it came to the European Commission, he wanted a seat at the ruling table. He was willing to compromise a little bit, say like, "Okay, I'll play your game as long as you let us have a seat at the ruling table." But then they completely shun him. So it'd be interesting to see, like, come the European parliamentary elections, if the Hungarians put their votes towards like the French-Italian coalition, like the more populist coalition that we're talking about, or the more like pro-European Union but want less migrants, like Polish coalition. So it'll be interesting to see how that they play out with that. But Hungary, more news about them is they have had the inverse of what Poland has been facing, as we discussed a few weeks ago. The opposition to Orban has been losing steam quickly. Now, you'll recall a few months back they were making quite the fuss over the slave laws, over the new labor laws in Hungary, which pretty much were implemented. Again, they were a bit harsh, but to stop the complete drain that you get out of a lot of these Eastern European countries, like a just complete drain of people. Now, it's interesting because during his State of the Nation address, pretty much, pretty much every country has one. He was talking about it, and people expected massive protests to the quote-unquote slave laws, but the demonstrations that they only managed to turn out were a few hundred people.
Right. Yeah. You don't hear about them anymore. And of course, a few months back when we dealt with that issue, we saw that this wasn't, it wasn't forced. People could take the option. There were a certain number of hours that they couldn't go over. We shouldn't also forget that, Hungary is experiencing a demographic problem. A lot of Hungarians are leaving Hungary. He's trying to find ways in order to keep people there and to keep the economy growing without having to sacrifice their national identity in the process. So, that's the way. I think that's a pretty reasonable take.
Yeah, I mean, it's either that or get pillaged by the European Union, which obviously Orban is showing he is definitely not willing to do. But I also think it's interesting the fact that the opposition in Hungary is losing so much steam when you have, like what we talked about a few weeks ago in Poland, with pretty much Soros and the European Union buying up all the major media outlets and trying to take control of them that way before like these crucial elections, these crucial polls coming out. So I think it's interesting how these things twist, and I think, again, it may soften the polls to the Russians maybe just a little bit, not even like necessarily on a personal level, but more of like a pragmatic level.
Yeah, that may be the case. I think we're going to see something in the very near future. The last show that we did, we were discussing how Poland's contract with Russia for gas is up in about 2.5, 3 years. And Nord Stream is still going through. So Germany could end up being a kind of fuel hub magnet for Europe. And they will have to negotiate as to how much they're willing to pay for gas and who they're going to buy it from.
Oh, yeah, absolutely. And especially with the I guess you could say, troubling times ahead in America, it might be too hard for us to ship all that, oil and gas across the Atlantic with, some stuff that may happen at home.
Right. And it also costs 30% more. That's a cost that Germany can, even Germany doesn't want to handle that, but I suppose if push came to shove, they might be able to, but Poland certainly can't do it.
Oh, absolutely not. And it's interesting, like we've been saying for several months now, things are just playing into Russia's hands just because the United States has become so incompetent since the end of the Cold War. But speaking of Russia, I do want to pivot a little bit here. So Italy has been continuing calling for the removal of sanctions on Russia, and now they want to remove EU sanctions on Syria. Now, on the Syria issue, the European Union is no longer able to form a cohesive policy. At the beginning of the war, you had pretty much the European Union, all the major countries saying, Assad must go, he must step down, he must at the very least talk to the opposition, and the revolution in Syria must succeed. But now we sit here and, since, wow, it's been, 8 years since the start of the war? I think the anniversary is either coming up soon or we just passed it. I can't remember exactly.
Yeah.
But, yeah, we're 8 years on. And the European Union is completely split. So you have France and Germany, and the UK are still technically kind of in. We'll talk about Brexit later. They want Assad to stand down. They stand behind the Syrian opposition wholeheartedly. But now you have the populists in Italy, Poland, Austria, just to name a few, who are saying the war is over, Assad has won. I don't care whether you like him or not. He's the legitimate government of Syria, and it's time for the refugees to go home. And now I actually figured this out just doing research in this. Poland has been negotiating for resettling refugees with Syria and Lebanon. They've been doing this since August, apparently.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's right. Many have gone back. I don't, I don't know how much longer the West is going to be able to try to restrain the developments that are happening in Syria, especially with Turkey's cooperation. Um, Even Assad, I think, to some extent, has accepted that his country is going to be fractured. However, I don't think there's going to be a Syrian Kurdistan ever. That is simply not going to happen.
Yeah, best case
Um,
scenario for the Syrian Kurds, it's going to be what happened in Iraq, where pretty much again they LARP as their own state, but at any point the sovereign government could put down their little, I guess you could say, pet project.
right, and Turkey would be more than happy to facilitate any kind of help that Syria might ask. Let's not forget that the Kurdish region of Syria is far closer to Turkey than that in Iraq.
Oh,
And
absolutely.
yeah, and of course, the Kurds in Syria, which actually are a slightly different polity, are more at odds with Turkey than those in Iraq. So
Yeah, like the PKK, like all the different groups in like
exactly.
Iraq, you have the Peshmerga or whatever they call themselves. Now, you were gonna, I actually wasn't gonna mention this, but you mentioned something about how Syria would remain fractured. It's actually interesting because a few days ago, Assad, of course, this was most like 99% chance he was talking hot air. He was talking about since, of course, you had Lindsey Graham over in Israel saying, "Oh, we have to recognize the Golan Heights." You know, all of a sudden they find oil in the Golan Heights, and we have to recognize it for our greatest ally, the state of Israel. But Assad was saying, "Oh yeah, we may go into the Golan Heights very soon, liberate our long occupied territory." Now, again, I think that's again 99.9% chance. That's hot air. That's bluster. That's him just throwing words around how diplomacy, diplomats do. But I just thought it was interesting the fact that he threw
Yeah.
that out there, and again I think it shows the fact that the Syrians feel very emboldened right now, considering the fact, like I said, 8 years on, Assad's still in Damascus right now.
Yeah, and we shouldn't forget that in 2018 there were some battles between some of the jihadist factions against Assad's forces and against Russian forces and against some Iranian forces. And Israel did not effectively intervene. And I mean, they did effectively take care of some of the jihad. Their bombing campaigns tended not to work. They lost, I believe, a helicopter and one of the fighter jets as well. So but I still agree with you. I think the Golan Heights, especially with the election coming up, um, can be a very effective card that Netanyahu can play. And I don't think we should underestimate whatsoever how much America will back Israel in case Israel shows seriousness, in about recognizing the Golan Heights. So is it going to happen? I'm not sure. It's not going to be as easy as recognizing Jerusalem as the capital.
Yeah, I mean, and when it comes to the Golan Heights, like when it comes to Syria's threats, like I said, mostly just bluster. But if Syria were to actually go through with these, Russia would completely drop and say, "Look, we have Tartus. We don't care what you do. You're on your own, champ." Whereas you'd have like the more radical factions, the Iranians, like the more radical factions that Iran supports in Syria. But I doubt you'd have the support of the Iranians as a whole, and it would pretty much be suicide for Assad to try to retake the Golan Heights again. It's one of those things he'll talk about until the end of time, but it's not feasible to do it unless like there was an absolute collapse of the state of Israel. But again, but yeah, it's one of those things where I think pretty much
Well,
everyone accepts for the past 50 years the Golan Heights is pretty much Israeli territory at this point.
right, but as long as it's not recognized, and in so doing, Israel is unable to tap oil there. Essentially, Assad has one without having to keep forces there.
Yeah, and yeah, pretty much.
I
Now,
mean, in this kind of in this type of warfare that's being played in this asymmetrical warfare, that is relevant because the long term, what we're seeing is an America that's is less able to dictate what it wants globally. So anyhow,
Yes.
But I agree with you. No, there he's not going to take the Golan
Yeah,
Heights.
like I said, unless the Israeli state were to completely collapse and like go into infighting tomorrow, there's no way Syrian forces could take the Golan Heights. No support for it. We pretty much reiterating what I just said. Now, on the
Yeah.
whole, before we get off on this little tangent here, maybe we should talk about that earlier in the show with Syria, but it worked out. But um, Italian Prime Minister Giuseppe Conte has also said that he's working to end sanctions against Russia, which he says, and I quote, are ineffective and harm the Italian economy. Now, this has been going on pretty much ever since he took office, actually almost a year ago, back in June. That's been one of the prime goals of the Italian government on the world stage, is the fact that they're trying to ease tensions with Russia. They're trying to increase trade with Russia. I think it was back in August that they signed like these massive trade deals with the Russians, and pretty much they're pretty much circumventing EU and US sanctions right now, but they just want to make it official.
Yeah. Lavrov was in Austria, and he's signing what seems to be like preliminary papers to future agreements in cooperation with Austria as well. So yeah, it's really speeding up. In some ways, Turkey has been sort of like, not to use another bird analogy, but the canary in the coal mine, in the sense that if Turkey can survive what it's doing for the last 2-3 years, including this first quarter of 2019, I think that's partly emboldened Italy and Austria. Orban has also been important in this regard, right? Is being able to call out, like to challenge them, to call the bluff.
Yeah, like I said, I think Orban pretty much. I think he pretty much started this fire and then it gradually spread. But I think he was the first one to really, ask the right questions and call it out. I do want to say with Turkey, with the fact that they've been surviving this, I also speculate, this is a bit off topic, that all those military assets, like all those naval assets we've been moving into the Black Sea, of course we'll say it's over the Kerch Strait crisis, it's over the Russian aggression, blah 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 blah, whatever. I think again a lot of it is probably to put some heat on Turkey.
Yeah, that's a very good point. That's a very good point. There's people who've had all kinds of conspiracy theories back when the not quite Turkish coup happened in 2016. You have some people who were saying, who thought, definitely America wanted him out. I tend to be in that camp, and then there were people who think that he staged the whole thing. I tend to think that, based on the name escapes me now, but Incirlik, based on what happened in Incirlik, that Orban figured out that there was a coup, and he negated it, and that really emboldened him. What's that?
You called him Orban.
What's that?
You called him Orban. Yeah, Erdogan.
Oh, sorry, Erdogan. I'm sorry about that. Yeah, yeah. I think that was maybe one of the big turning points. Was that coup, or was the suppression of that coup? And Erdogan has been very bold since then.
Yeah, and just again to get off on a side. Apparently, I guess this is the episode of sides, but it's interesting because actually, when Erdogan gave the broadcast on like the iPhone, Israel actually gave him the uplink to actually make that broadcast. And also, it's interesting because the coup, of course, happened in 2016, last year of Obama. That seems like a parting shot Obama would take because, again, Obama was like pretty much the epitome, the apex liberal internationalist. Like, oh, we're all going to be the same. We're all just going to mix together. We got to stop those evil Russians. So we got to make a deal with the Iranians. We got to just have them surrounded and squeezed out. We got to talk to the Chinese. So it seems like it's something Obama would do, take a parting shot, take it at this guy who likes to straddle the line, who likes to talk to Putin sometimes, but also likes to shake your hand.
Yeah, I think that's a very good analysis. And Obama was generally not effective. He was not effective at concealing his unwillingness to bomb ISIS until he was pressed. And he was unsuccessful in being able to regime change in Syria as well. So I have no doubt that that's a possibility. I just don't think that Erdogan created this elaborate mock coup. He sent out a rumor, and I think that kind of coup on that scale needs affirmation from outside players.
Yeah,
It cannot just come from within.
and
You can't just
not to
hire a
insult
bunch
some.
of Americans pretending to be CIA.
I get your point, but not to insult someone, of course, like Erdogan, who's been, love him or hate him, he's been very successful in his goals. I don't think it's within his capability to stage a fake coup like this. I think it would have been much more simplistic.
Right, I think so too. Also, I don't think he would have wanted to, even if he could. I don't see. The country was facing all kinds of terrorist attacks. It was very unstable. Um, I don't see why he would risk it. Like, what was there to? There's no gain in it.
Yeah, I would definitely agree, but yeah, I just think it's interesting how this whole thing's been turning around. But just back to the Italians, yeah, pretty much Italy again is spearheading the way in terms of yeah, maybe let's stop this whole thing with Russia. And on top of that, it's interesting because Russia, China getting close together. The Italian government rejected Chinese infrastructure investments recently, pretty much saying we don't want their influence over our country. So again, it sort of goes back to what I was talking about a few weeks ago, where Russia has pretty much set itself in this nice position where if things in Europe go well, they have their partners in Europe, but if things in Europe don't go so well, they can go back to China, and they can also sort of balance the two if both of them do go well.
Very much. Yeah, it's amazing how well they've navigated themselves. I mean, considering that in the '90s it looked like it was over. That Russia itself might go the way of Yugoslavia, considering the two Chechen wars. And then 20 years later, they're a player again.
Yeah. I mean, like domestic policy, like yeah, the whole host of issues, but internationally, Russia by doing relatively little, they've like again, I bring this up so much because it's just so fascinating. It's like by all logic, this should not have happened.
I know if there was ever a case for like divine providence, Russia would be it right now.
Yeah, and like I said,
Um,
for yeah, I'm not saying the U.S. is perfect. I bash on U.S. internal policy fucking all day in and out. But again, for a country as plagued with internal problems as Russia, it's kind of like I said, it's amazing that this has happened to them internationally.
yeah, I think they're also motivated by fixing those problems. By getting their economy to the kind of sanctions from the near the end, or definitely in the second 14 and then 2015 definitely had did affect their economy to an extent, and so they've quite a few different to arrive where they are, and Putin, you know, he's, he's come out really strong. He's never taken the bait,
Oh,
and the
absolutely
game keeps
not.
changing.
Yeah, I mean, look, if Obama really wanted to destroy Russia, if he really wanted to kneecap Russia, he should have just kept the ties open and let global homo just keep on flooding in slowly but surely. That would have been much more effective at the end of the day.
Yeah, they couldn't resist.
Yeah. But just to move on from this, some more European Union news is our favorite subject. I've been going on about this for a while. Brexit. Now, is it happening? Honestly, who the fuck knows at this point? Now, the UK is officially scheduled to leave on March 29th, but there's been calls for a second referendum, and there's still no solid deal with the EU. And the vote in Parliament today pretty much shot down Theresa May's rickety plan, and I don't know what's going to happen. Come the next couple weeks, are the Brits still going to be in the European Union? Again, I don't know. My guess would be is Theresa May, I think from the beginning, she never supported it, so she probably did everything within her power to make this fail, to sabotage it. But I think, worst case scenario, again, the UK is going to give up all their bargaining power at the European Union, but still be subjugated to their rules. Best case scenario, ironically enough, at this point, is just getting out with no deal and seeking outside partners.
Yes, and the only partners I think well, not the only partners, but let's face it, Brexit is also about within the Anglo-American sphere, there's a contingent that wants Britain more closely aligned with America. Of course, there's a division within Britain, even within nationalist circles, to not allow that to happen, but at the same time to insist on Brexit. That doesn't give a lot of options other than they're going to have to look eastward, and certainly Russia cannot fulfill, Britain's needs. However, they would need to make some kind of partnership with them as well.
Yeah.
But I would say Trump represents that contingent, that almost like an inevitable decline of some kind. Like, I think immigration policy, like, let's make America 1 billion, is part of this, the idea that was sort of thrown about in CFR circles and so on, that there would be 5-6 different regions. All of them would have massive populations. They would be under one country or 1 or 2 or 3 countries, but they would be closely aligned. And so, I think this contingent looks at America becoming a block, like a very big, large block, and Britain becomes an outpost.
Yeah. Pretty much for Brexit, the prevailing two ones are like, oh yeah, let's turn to America, which is actually a bit of a twist of irony when you consider foundation of America. But that's aside the point. But then I see, like, amongst the more nationalistic ones, they want to turn to the Commonwealth. They want to be like, oh, God save the Queen. We'll talk to the Canadians. We'll talk to the Australians. We'll talk to our other little former colonies spread out throughout the world. So those are the two major camps. I mean, Russia, again, that's out of the question. I think the UK alone has pretty much soured any good relations with Russia for the next several generations within, like, living memory. Again, people are too soured on both sides. China, it doesn't really seem feasible. Doesn't really even seem in the Chinese interest to start doing what they do in Africa and the UK. I mean, granted, the UK might look like Africa's standards of living pretty soon, but that's aside the point. That's entirely aside the point. But yeah, like I said, the two prevailing blocks are either going to be, we're going to turn to the United States, or we're going to turn to our former colonies.
But I would argue that the colonies, Canada especially, is part of the American bloc anyways.
Yeah, like you make a good point. Pretty much America's absorbed the Anglosphere, especially in terms of Canada. Also, especially with our pivot to Asia, increased cooperation with Australia and New Zealand. So it's interesting enough because they present these like there's these two disparate options, but at the end of the day, it's pretty much the same option.
Yeah.
It's just more like, oh, do we want to call it our Commonwealth, or do we want to be part of the American sphere? It's pretty much just an argument over branding at this point.
Yeah, I mean, from British English friends that I speak with, though, they're in a way they're at a loss about what to do. Being with the EU will erode their identity. And some have rightly argued that even if they leave the EU, immigration policies are likely to be the same, and the demographic problems that are on the horizon are still going to be there. So, I think them aligning with the states has to deal with security and influence.
Y-
more than anything else. Trade, of course, but I think security and clout and influence are the biggies.
Yeah, I would definitely agree. And like I said, this is all contingent on the fact that they actually do get out. And like I said, I'm leaning towards, at least in my analysis, probably the worst case scenario where they're going to give up all their bargaining power, all their seats at the table, and be subject to the EU rules and regulations. So, look, I blackpill, I guess you call it, about America sometimes. But honestly, I'm so glad I'm not living in the UK. That's the very least I can say about this.
Yeah.
But with that, let's move on to some more, I guess you call it European news. None other than the Ukrainian elections. Now, the Ukrainian elections are just a little less than 3 weeks away, and it's not looking good for the Candyman himself, Poroshenko.
It's looking terrible. They're already gloating on Russian television right now about it.
I mean,
Um,
even his Western neoliberal handlers. I've seen stuff like, of course, it's not like front page news, but I've seen stuff like in American outlets and like all the usual neocon neoliberags, pretty much going against Poroshenko, calling him pretty much an incompetent buffoon.
yeah, and he is because they have a very systemic problem with corruption and a very divided public, um, and it's just not. It was not a good situation. Ukraine has been through a lot. We shouldn't forget about Chernobyl. Uh, uh, Challenges, let's say. Um, but I think there's people that are very pragmatic, and the pragmatism is partly fueling the corruption. And Poroshenko is not an exception to it. I don't think he's battling it.
Oh, absolutely not. And I'm about to get into that. So, impeachment proceedings for Poroshenko have begun, and it's over a money laundering scandal and some smuggling stuff. And this movement is, of course, spearheaded by Timoshenko. Who else would it be? But the report that they collected on this, the report that pretty much the investigators have collected on this, reveals that under Poroshenko, top defense industry officials have received kickbacks for obtaining contraband military vehicle parts, most of which were smuggled in from, wait for it, from Russia.
Yeah, I mean, this is just an extension of the problem they've been having with receiving arms from Western sources that end up being sold to the Novorossiyan rebels. so, so now he's now partly in on it, and this is what I mean about the corruption and the pragmatism and the desperation of the situation, right? Like he's trying to find a way to, uh, well, I mean, become wealthier, but I mean, they look at the West as a cash cow, and they're looking for opportunities.
Yeah, because
Um,
who doesn't want that development aid?
right, right, and they're on various IMF loans, and they don't have their gold anymore, so there's no leverage. I think it's made Ukraine even more despotic.
Oh, absolutely. And you know what we're overlooking here? The whole time, look, honestly, I don't know how we missed this, especially after the past 3 years of being so vigilant against Russian aggression. The fact that this whole time Poroshenko was the real Russian puppet.
Putin gets the last laugh again.
I
Well,
don't know how he
there
does
was
it.
the
Every single time he just manages. Again, the man is ingenious. He has the entire world just like on like those like puppet string things. It's like I don't know
how is
how he
he
does it.
doing this? How is he doing this? Like, it's so hilarious. Uh, Never was there a man with more agency in the 21st century.
Oh, absolutely not. But now the Ukrainian elections are on the 31st of this month, March, and there are a whopping 44 candidates standing for office. Now, the only viable ones, and I use that term loosely, are Zelensky. We've talked about him. He's the comedian who pretty much formed his own party. He's the front runner. Poroshenko was up until very recently, and of course, none other than our good friend Timoshenko. One wonderful person all around. Trust me. No, I'm
Oh
gonna I'm,
yeah.
I'm gonna go out on a limb, and I'm gonna say that the meddling from the European Union and the U.S. is probably gonna put Timoshenko in power. I don't think I I have a hard time seeing Zelensky being able to take power, even by the will of the Ukrainian people. I think some outside force is going to stifle him. I think he's going to get into a nasty accident soon. I think some scandal is going to pop up within the next few weeks. Or maybe again, maybe he's in the safe zone. Maybe they would have done this earlier had that been the case. But I still have a feeling that he's not going to get it as much as he would probably be the best option.
Well, I mean, Zelensky is definitely the candidate that the West does not want to get in office. Timoshenko, of course, has a long history. She has her own corruption issues, but considering Poroshenko's unpopularity, yeah, she's the obvious choice.
Yeah. Now, like I said, I don't think I think Timoshenko's gonna get in there because I don't see any way Zelensky can win. Again, there's too much outside influence, and I I don't see how honestly they will let this guy win. I see again, like I said, I see some scandal or some accident or something happening to the misfortune of this man.
Right. And also, the last show we touched on how Ukraine does not want any foreign observers for the election. I don't know if they're still serious about that, but that is what they were saying a few weeks back. So that's going to be very interesting to watch. It's going to be interesting what the West has to say about this fledgling democracy under the boot of Russia. And
Oh, absolutely. That just remember the Maidan. It was just so wonderful. It was such a great time and democracy in Ukraine, and it brings a tear to my eye. Honestly, I could write an entire Washington Post piece about this.
hey,
But
well, we'll know soon enough.
yeah, like I said, hopefully it's Zelensky. And when it comes down to the Jewish community being your best option, your country's got some problems. I know I don't have much room to speak. It's the absolute state of my country. The clown car of clown world. But again, that's aside the point. I want to touch on North Korea. We talked about, of course, the summit, which had a bit of a falling out, and people are now really trying to. Again, like I said, I've been pretty sour on Trump lately. I'm not here to sing his praises or be a blind defender of him. But I think people are really looking into making this Korea summit thing look a lot worse than it is. Because, immediately afterwards people were saying, oh, look at how Trump failed. Look at, how he didn't get a deal. And like you were saying, like Pompeo and, again, the one issue Pompeo actually gets right is the Korea issue. And pretty much everyone around Trump is saying, like, look, you're going in. It's not going to end well. Don't try to push for a deal. Just be casual about this. Treat it like the first one. Trump's like, no, I'm going to push for a deal. And, of course, we all know what happens. But now they're trying to, say, like, oh, North Korea is opening up another launch site. Oh, they're reconstructing whatever. And they actually did this after the first summit. They did this like at the end of June of last year, trying to say, oh, look, North Korea is building another launch site. Yet these things never pan out. The thing is, like I said, I've been saying this about the Korea summit for the past almost year now. So long as the two Koreas continue their cooperation, which again they are, that's what matters. That means it's been successful because look, if North Korea starts to get sour on South Korea tomorrow, if they start to, if they stop the demilitarization of the border, the small demilitarization that they're doing, if they stop reconnecting the railways, then you can get concerned about peace in Korea. But just the fact that the U.S. and North Korea are falling out, that isn't the end of the world. And of course, a lot of people looking for war or to just disparage Trump in general, which I don't know why. Trump has pretty much handed them everything they want at this point. Not really any point. It's not, again, it's not like early 2018 Trump where there was actually a point in disparaging him. But again, they're looking for something just to hammer this and say like, oh look, it's a failure.
Right, and we shouldn't underestimate that North Korea is very well aware of the kind of divisions that are setting in America. So they see a kind of an internal struggle, an internal division within America. Its culture and its politics. And I think when they quote unquote start building another site, Um, whether that's actually happening or not, or whether or when they blow off Trump. Um, a lot of that is based on the kind of division that he's seeing in America. So he feels he can afford to do that. So he's in that sense confident that he can play America
Yeah,
on the geopolitical level because of the internal division.
yeah,
And
like we were saying last time, considering the fact he can't even negotiate with his own party to get border security, it makes him look, very weak on the international stage. It's like if he can't even negotiate with these people who, supposedly agree with him, I'm going to walk all over this guy. This is going to be a piece of cake.
right, right, and also just to bring back to what you were saying about as long as there's cooperation between the two Koreas, I think South Korea is the real broker here. I think they're going to be the one that is going to be the in between man because I think it shouldn't be doubted that North Korea is far more comfortable, I think, negotiating with South Korea for obvious reasons over say America, and South Korea is really the only country that can assuage its concerns and where the chips might fall. So that's going to that's who I think the real player is behind the scenes here.
Yeah, like I said, I think Trump's biggest success is he got the ball rolling on this. Like I said, back in a much more earlier optimistic time where Trump had a lot more political capital, as a much more effective politician, he was able to, do the my red button is bigger than yours and the fire and fury routine to get Korea in the line. Now that Korea's in the line talking to other Korea, I think the U.S. role is pretty much almost, nothing at this point. That I'm under the opinion that look, if we can get like some formal declarations, like some formal peace declarations signed between North Korea and the U.S., I think after that our role is pretty much over.
Yeah, and that's precisely what I'm saying as
Yeah,
well. I'm glad you put it that way. This isn't to say. I mean, of course, we're aware that uh, South Korea is very much under the American bloc and under American power and influence. We do realize that, right? But the history of American Anglo world hegemony is also based on a more liberal policy, right? The impression, of course, always has to be maintained that certain client states have power, and I don't think that's all theater either. So I guess what I'm saying is within the scope of where South Korea is with regards to American power, they do have agency and leverage to some degree. And so that's what I meant by it. I just wanted to clarify that. I did, just in
yeah,
case some of
and
our listeners may misunderstand me.
yeah, with your little tangent about like the American power, like Anglo-American power maintaining the liberal delusion. I remember like the old adage went like, had India been a French colony, the French would have shot Gandhi.
That's a
It was
possibility.
yeah,
Yeah.
it was something like that. And it reminds me of that the fact that Gandhi could only do what he did is because he was under a liberal empire, and of course they'd be sympathetic to, oh look, the poor people we're supposed to be helping, they're starving themselves because of us, and we have to pull out. Whereas like any other like more harsher imperialistic power would have been like, okay, fine, starve yourself for all we care. But yeah, that's what it reminded me of. And like again, the North Korea issue, like I said, pretty much the U.S. has gotten the ball rolling, and like I said, after there's a formal peace declaration, I think our role is pretty much done. But I did want to
Mhm.
move on to just to close out the show, a little bit of news on Venezuela because we're getting some Gulf War tier kind of propaganda going on now. With
Oh
oh
yeah.
yeah. So in Venezuela, there's been power outages. Now I don't think the U.S. did the power outages. I imagine it was just because the whole country's falling apart. Somebody probably attacked the power grid because again, with these very high IQ individuals, you know that they do the most sane and rational things, and that they definitely know how to manage a country, and that these kind of things would happen definitely with these high IQ, sane and rational individuals who populate Venezuela.
Well, I mean that's possible, but I tend to think that there's people either independently inspired by America that are doing this. It wasn't happening before.
Oh yeah, there's definitely some trickery here, but I don't think like we hacked into the power grid or whatever. But again,
Yeah, I don't think it's
that's
as
more straw
sophisticated
man
as
stuff.
that.
But
I think
yeah,
somebody sabotaged it.
yeah,
Honestly, like this thing has been sabotaged, and it could be just an independent player who understands the politics and how this could play well if they would prefer that Maduro is forced out. I know that, yeah, I don't. I mean, we're not suggesting harp here, people.
yes. But the recent like really Gulf War tier propaganda they tried to get us with, they cut out the power, so all these babies and young children, they're going to all have heat strokes now, and we had to personally fan each and every one, and you know what? They took them out of the incubators, they put them on the floor. Can you believe Saddam would do? Wait, Assad, Gaddafi. Who are we trying to overthrow now? Look, these names they all kind of blend together. What's the guy's name?
Yeah, Guaido.
Yeah, yeah. Juan Gato is more like it. No, oh boy, I got to get into him a little bit, but yeah, pretty much what they've been doing here is, oh yes, look, think of the children, like definitely like the Gulf War. It's only a matter of time before the Colombian ambassador daughter dresses up like some poor refugee and gives a speech from the UN. I feel like I've seen this somewhere before. It's like
Yeah, yeah. I don't think this was an. I certainly I have no reason to believe that somebody in Maduro's camp has done this. Um, this was either incompetency or I tend to believe it was sabotage. Um, but you know what? Brazil and Colombia are not willing to go in forcefully, so the coalition doesn't look very strong right now.
yeah, I said that more facetiously, of course, but yeah, again, but yeah, we'll have some higher ranking officials, child posing as some refugee, but yeah, the coalition is falling apart. Even like someone like Bolsonaro doesn't want to go on because they really it's more trouble than it's worth, and it's better just to let the system fall in on itself than try to make it than try to have outside forces collapse it. Now, it's actually interesting. I didn't read too much into this. It was about a week ago, like because we didn't do the show last week, of course. Is apparently um Pence and Guaido are pissed off at each other over just apparently there was an exchange of words. I believe they were actually met in Argentina, and yeah, apparently the meeting did not go well.
Oh, I didn't hear about this.
Yeah, like I said, I only briefly saw it. I didn't read too much into it. By the time I looked for it, it was like such old news. You had to go digging through it. I didn't really have the time. But yeah, it's interesting because the look when the whole Venezuela thing happened, I was very blackpilled. I thought, oh yeah, we're gonna get this. We're gonna get the millions of refugees. Hello, welcome to Florida. Please don't vote blue. I'm sure you guys will all vote Republican. I'm sure you'll all vote for Ted Cruz or Marco Rubio because again, they're your co-ethnics and they definitely, again, maybe if we just have them read, I don't know, Milton Friedman or whoever, they'll become based right wing Republicans. But yeah, that was my thoughts in January, late January, when the Venezuelan revolution thing first happened. But again, as weeks go on, it's slowly falling apart to the point where even like Trump has backed off. When was the last time Trump said anything about Venezuela? Can you remember?
No. I
Yeah,
mean, February is past and we are nearly halfway into March.
yeah, like and again, like I said, Mike Pence had his spat with Guaido. Nobody even knows who Guaido is anymore. Again, it was one of those names that came and went like that. So things, ironically, I wouldn't say ironically, man, wrong word, but strangely enough, have worked out to the point where we may be getting that best case scenario in Venezuela where like nobody cares about, nobody does anything. We just kind of let them, solve their own problems. And I look, you go back to last week of January. I don't know. I think it was like January 23rd or something. Some like again like that late January. You told me that this would have been the outcome like around like a month and a half later, and it's like, okay, yeah, nice joke, funny one. Yeah, U.S. boots will be on the ground. We'll be bombing Venezuela, and we'll get all those refugees. But if you would have, told me now, it's like, okay, I'm sad. I'm surprised yet satisfied with the outcome.
Yeah, same. Yeah, this is, and especially so Trump doesn't lose face. The more slowly this sort of smolders and doesn't become a hot spot, the better.
Y-
Um,
I mean, it's the
Of
point where
course,
only it's
there has to be an end to it of some kind.
yeah, yeah.
Um, but yeah, the support's not there. Guaido, after his meeting, uh, you know, there's no consensus. There's no consensus, um, to go in, and there isn't another aid line of aid trucks trying to pour in that have caught on fire. So it's not looking like it's going to happen.
Oh yeah, yeah. I would agree, and it's interesting how again this pretty much all played out, and Guaido like total joke. I mean to the point where yeah, Marco Rubio is honestly the only person of I guess significance. I use that word loosely. Who's still talking about this? So he'll still harangue. He wants to get those. Oh, we're gonna turn those Latino voters Republican by telling them look how bad Venezuela is, and because that's gonna work. But yeah, Rubio is pretty much the only person still talking about this. And he was pretty much shamed by everyone after the Gaddafi tweet.
Right. I mean, I think Rubio's really flexing. Maybe he thinks he's going to be president someday.
I'm maybe president of Venezuela. I don't know. Like maybe that's his long term goal. If I can't be president here, I know he's Cuban, whatever. But I'm going home and I'm gonna go be president at home. You know, again,
Yeah,
like
I mean, Trump could end up being president of Israel, and Rubio can be president of Venezuela.
yeah, yeah. There was that poll saying like 98% of Israeli voters would support Trump as prime minister. There, I mean, look, you can have them both at this point. Look, honestly, have fun. Yeah, you take Mike Pence too. I don't care which one he goes. Just get him out. Then we have to deal with President Pelosi. That would be something else. But again, it sounds. But yeah, it's interesting to see how this whole like further in Venezuela the regime change. They thought they were either going to get like the right wings like don't you hate those commies and socialist right wingers like I don't care build the wall. Left wingers like it's Trump so I'm not going to support anything Trump does. And it's interesting how both coalitions they tried to build just fell apart within like not even a month.
I know. I know, and the longer this goes on, the further we're going to be inching towards election, and I cannot see Trump getting involved in something within 12 months of the election.
Yet not even like someone as like whack job as John Bolton or Mike Pompeo would suggest that they'd be like, oh look, yeah, we can start this war after the election, but we got to make sure we're here to finish it.
Right, right. There either has to be a very quick resolve. Uh, who knows? Maybe, maybe, maybe he might have a deal. I don't know. It doesn't seem likely right now. But there's no resolution. There's no immediate resolution to this. And the longer it goes on, the worse it's going to be for his campaign. So.
Yeah, and I will say this just as a closing thought for the entire show. Like you said, pretty much as we're inching close to the election, it becomes less and less likely conflict will start unless, like, again, they get like a really good false flag, like which I doubt they're going to get. But at the very least, I would say conflict in Iran is pretty much completely off the table until after 2020. Who knows what will happen after 2020? Um, Conflict with Syria is pretty much almost entirely off the table, except like, oh yeah, we may lob some more missiles at them in a month. Venezuela again is the most likely one, and like we said, the prospects of that fell apart very quickly to the point where, again, who's still talking about besides Marco Rubio? And I suppose that's a little bit of the white pill after weeks, I suppose months of black pills and things looking down. I suppose you can take that one and take it to the bank or your little lockbox or whatever wherever you keep your little white pills. I don't know.
I'll take it.
Oh, okay. Just make sure it's not a suppository. We don't want to hear about that. Okay. Um, but yeah, so much for like, oh, this episode may be running a bit shorter. Look, I say that every episode, and seldom does it happen. But again, we got all the topics. Very interesting episode, especially considering the fact it's a lot of last week's news, and seeing this week is young, there wasn't much news out, and again, based on the way things have been, I think it's probably going to be a slow week, at least on the international stage. Now, if World War III starts tomorrow, I'll try to fit in time for a special episode. One of those kind of things. But
Yeah,
but
World War III, we're here. We're gonna have a stream, guys.
yeah, it's like okay, maybe the nukes are preferable to whatever is in the future. I would prefer to just grab onto the fence than be, I guess, violated by an Amazon robot. So there's that at the very least. But I will leave you with those thoughts. Just think about our new AI overlords and our gender neutral AI overlords or
Oh,
whatever,
God.
and maybe grabbing the fence, maybe that whole '80s nuclear war hysteria. Maybe that was the preferable option. Maybe we should have let that one Russian guy, retaliate when he thought there were nukes coming towards him. But with that, I will end the show.